I 34 male work as a forensic accountant. My days are spent tracing hidden assets, unraveling corporate fraud, and reading the digital footprints people think they are completely erased. You learn a lot about human nature when you look at where the money goes. My wife and I have been married for 3 years. We met through mutual friends, dated for 2 years before that, and tied the knot in what seemed like a standard, predictable progression. We lived in a house I purchased 5 years before we even met. I kept the deed entirely in my name, which is standard practice when you bring a significant premarital asset into a union. We had a joint checking account for household expenses, but we maintained separate personal accounts. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary until a random Tuesday night that completely blew up my life. Wife had dropped her phone in the kitchen sink earlier that day and completely fried it. She was practically having a meltdown about being disconnected from her family, so she asked me to pull her old iPad out of storage. She said she needed it to use for emails and basic iMessage until her new phone arrived in the mail. I dug it out of a box in the guest room closet. It had been sitting dead in that box for over a year. She handed it to me, complaining that it was being glitchy and wouldn't connect to our home Wi-Fi. I sat at the kitchen island, ran a quick software update, and reconnected the network. The exact moment it connected to the internet, the screen completely froze. Because the device had been offline for over 12 months, a massive tidal wave of backlogged iMessage notifications flooded the screen all at once as it finally synced with her iCloud account. I was just about to lock the screen and hand it back to her when a banner notification caught my eye. It was a message from my mother-in-law. It read, "Is Phase 1 still a go for Friday? BIL needs the cash by Monday at the absolute latest." I stopped breathing for a second. I didn't know what Phase 1 was, but I knew my brother-in-law. He was chronically complaining about money, always driving cars he couldn't afford, and constantly hinting at needing a handout. I tapped the notification without thinking. It opened a group chat. The title of the chat was Operation Freedom, Getting Her Out. The only members in the chat were wife, MIL, FIL, and BIL. I sat in the dead quiet of my kitchen, just listening to the low hum of the refrigerator, and scrolled up. I scrolled back a week, then a month, then 6 months. What I read outlined conspiracies so meticulous, entitled, and entirely vile that it felt like reading a script for a bad true crime documentary. They weren't just discussing a simple divorce. They were planning a complete financial and personal dismantling of my life, and they felt entirely justified in doing it. Wife had apparently decided she wanted out over a year ago. She complained that I worked too much and that she deserved an upgrade in her lifestyle. However, under our state laws, and given the very short duration of our marriage, she wouldn't be entitled to much if she simply filed for divorce. She certainly wouldn't get my premarital home, and she wouldn't get a dime of spousal support. FIL had chimed in around February, laying out the groundwork. He told her that I had equity and savings, and if she just walked away, she would get nothing. He literally typed out, "You need leverage to force a settlement." Leverage, according to this family chat, meant forcing me out of my own home and draining my liquid assets before the divorce was even officially filed. BIL was the one who outlined the actual strategy. He told her to get a temporary restraining order. He explained that if she claimed I threatened her or got violent, the police would remove me from the property immediately. I wouldn't be allowed back to collect my things. She would have exclusive use of the house. Once I was locked out, she was supposed to immediately empty our joint accounts and transfer my emergency fund. BIL wrote that they would use that money to cover his margins, and by the time the family court sorted out the mess months later, the money would be long gone, and I would be desperate enough to settle just to get my house back. Wife's response to this plan was the part that made my blood run cold. She wasn't horrified. She just typed, "I'm nervous. What if he records me?" And Mile immediately jumped in with coaching. She told her daughter that I didn't have cameras inside the house, only a doorbell camera. She instructed wife to do it in the living room, to break something expensive, and to say I threw it at her. And Mile wrote, "Cry. You know how to cry and play the victim perfectly. The cops will believe the crying woman." They had picked a specific date to execute this coming Friday. I was reading this on a Tuesday evening. I read every single message. I didn't panic. My professional training kicked in. I exported the entire chat history as a PDF file and emailed it directly to my heavily encrypted work server. I went into the iPad's mail app and deleted the outgoing email from the sent folder, then cleared the trash. I closed the messaging app, locked the screen, and walked out into the living room. Wife looked up from the television, looking completely bored. She asked if I fixed it. I said yeah, the Wi-Fi was working fine now, and it was good to go. I handed it to her. She just muttered a thanks and barely looked at me. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream or demand answers. I just turned around, went into my home office, locked the door, and started drafting my counter-operation. Wednesday morning, I took a half-day off work and sat in the expensive, oak-paneled office of a ruthless family law attorney. I handed him a printed, time-stamped, 50-page binder of the group chat logs. He read to the first few pages, skipped to the middle, and then read the specific exchange about the restraining order and the police. He actually took off his glasses and rubbed his temples in disbelief. He told me clinically that they were planning to file a false domestic violence report to illegally evict me from my premarital property and dissipate marital funds. He called it conspiracy to commit fraud, filing a false police report, and extortion. I asked him how we stop it. He leaned forward and told me we don't just stop it. We let them trip the wire, but we remove all the explosives first. My lawyer gave me extremely strict instructions on what I could and couldn't do under state law, so I wouldn't look like the aggressor. I could not drain our joint account entirely, as that could be seen as a preemptive financial strike, and a judge might penalize me later. However, I absolutely could stop contributing to it. I immediately logged into my company's payroll portal and redirected my direct deposit to a brand new individual account at a completely different banking institution. The joint account currently had about $3,000 in it to cover the upcoming mortgage payment and utilities. I left it exactly as it was. Next, I called my credit card companies. Wife was an authorized user on 3 of my high-limit premium cards. I knew if I canceled the cards outright, she might get an alert on her credit monitoring app, which would tip her off. Instead, I simply lowered the spending limits on her specific authorized user cards to $100 each. Then came the physical assets. Over the course of my career, I had accumulated a lot of sensitive physical documents, client hard drives, and a personal collection of expensive vintage watches. I packed them all into 2 heavy duffel bags while wife was out getting coffee with a friend. I drove to a secure, highly rated storage facility on the other side of town, rented a climate-controlled unit under my LLC's name, and locked everything away. The most critical step was the house itself. Since the chat explicitly stated they were banking on my lack of indoor cameras, I had to fix that immediately. My state is a one-party consent state for recording conversations, meaning as long as I am a party to conversation, or if the recording happens in a common area of a shared residence where there is no legal expectation of privacy, it is perfectly legal to record. I went to a specialty electronics store and bought 4 microscopic, high-definition pinhole cameras. I spent Wednesday night installing them while she was asleep. I put one inside the living room smoke detector, one nestled between books on the kitchen shelf, one high up in the hallway pointing down, and one focused directly at the inside of the front door. I hardwired them to a hidden cellular hotspot I brought from my office, so they wouldn't show up on our home router's device list. They streamed directly to a secure cloud server that only I had the password to. By Thursday, the sheer entitlement from her family started showing its ugly head, and Mael came over unannounced in the middle of the afternoon. She walked right past me and straight into my home office, looking around with a calculating, greedy gaze. She was clearly scoping the place out. She casually mentioned she was just seeing what I was up to, noting that my office usually had more clutter. I told her I was just doing some spring cleaning. She bought it, then smoothly added that Biel was coming by tomorrow with his large work van to borrow my pressure washer. I told her he could take it. I already knew from the chat logs that the van wasn't for the pressure washer. It was to load up my expensive electronics, my television, my golf clubs, and anything else of value the exact moment the police dragged me out of the house. They were planning to rob me blind while I was sitting in a holding cell. Thursday night. The tension was thick. Wife was acting incredibly erratic. She intentionally picked a massive fight over the way I loaded the dishwasher. She raised her voice aggressively. clearly trying to get a volatile reaction out of me. She stood way too close, practically begging me to push past her or yell back. I noticed her phone sitting on the counter, screen face down. I knew without a doubt she was recording audio, hoping to catch me losing my temper. I just maintained a safe distance, kept my hands visibly open by my sides, and spoke in a calm, flat tone. I agreed to load the plates on the bottom rack from now on. She huffed, visibly frustrated that I wasn't taking the bait, and stormed upstairs. I checked the cloud feed on my laptop. The cameras were recording crystal clear video and audio. Everything was perfectly in place. Friday arrived, the day of Phase 1. I drove home from work experiencing a strange, icy clarity. I wasn't sad anymore. I was just ready. I pulled into my driveway at exactly 5:30 p.m. As I turned onto my street, I noticed Bael's large white van parked a few houses down, engine off, sitting quietly in the shadows of a large oak tree. He was waiting for his sister's signal. I unlocked the front door and walked into the hallway. Wife was standing dead center in the living room. The exact second she heard the door click shut, her entire demeanor shifted. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, absolute terror. It was genuinely unsettling to watch someone I had slept next to for years fabricate that level of fear on command. She started screaming at the top of her lungs, asking why I was doing this. She backed away from me, throwing her hands up to protect her face, even though I was standing perfectly still, silently holding my briefcase, at least 15 feet away from her. She shrieked for me to stop. Then, she reached out and grabbed a heavy, blue glass vase from the coffee table. She didn't throw it at me. She turned violently and hurled it directly against the living room drywall, shattering into hundreds of pieces and leaving a massive dent in the wall. Then, she dug her own fingernails deeply into her collarbone and dragged them downward with force, leaving 3 deep, angry red scratches across her skin. She pulled her phone from her pocket, dialed 911, and put on speaker. She cried into the receiver, her voice trembling with perfectly manufactured panic. She told the dispatcher her husband was going crazy, throwing things and threatening to kill her. She begged for help and rattled off our address. She hung up the phone and looked across the room at me. The panic vanished from her face for a split second, replaced by a cold, smug, incredibly entitled smirk. She actually whispered that I should probably pack a bag because I wouldn't be coming back. I didn't say a single word to her. I calmly walked over to the kitchen island, pulled out a stool, and sat down. I opened my tablet, logged securely into the camera portal, pulled up the living room feed, and waited. 8 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed intensely through the front windows. 2 police officers approached the door with their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. I called out loudly, telling them the door was unlocked and they could come in. They stepped inside and immediately assessed the scene. They saw the shattered glass all over the floor, the dent in the wall, and the fresh, bleeding scratch marks on Wife's chest. Wife immediately burst into fresh, hysterical tears. She pointed a shaking finger at me and sobbed that I came home and just snapped. She claimed I threw the vase at her head, pushed her violently against the wall, and she wanted me out of the house immediately so she could press charges. The taller officer, a sergeant, stepped firmly between us. He looked at me and ordered me to stand up slowly and step outside onto the porch with his partner. I complied without a single hesitation. I walked out into the cool evening air with the second officer. The officer pulled out his notepad and asked if I wanted to tell him what happened inside. I spoke clearly and calmly. I told him my wife was attempting to secure a temporary restraining order under false pretenses to force an illegal eviction and gain access to my financial assets. I told him she threw the vase herself and scratched her own chest. The officer sighed heavily. He had a look of tired skepticism on his face, like he dealt with guys denying domestic violence every single day. He told me firmly that she had physical marks. The house was destroyed, and unless I had solid proof, the law dictated that I was going to be removed from the property. I told him I had proof. I handed him my tablet. I had already queued up the video from the hidden living room camera, time-stamped exactly 5 minutes prior. The officer pressed play. The high-definition audio and video played out flawlessly on the bright screen. He watched me walk in the front door and stand by the entrance. He watched wife scream at empty space. He watched her aggressively smash the vase against the wall. He watched her rake her own nails across her chest, pull out her phone, and fake the 911 call. The officer's eyes widened. He stood on my porch and watched the entire video a second time just to be sure. Then he looked up at me, handed the tablet back, and told me to wait right there. He walked back inside the house. I stood on the porch, listening through the screen door. I heard the sergeant inside ask wife if she was absolutely certain I threw the vase. Wife cried loudly, swearing to God that I did. The sergeant asked if I caused the scratches on her chest. She yelled yes, claiming I grabbed her violently. There was a very heavy, very tense pause. Then, the officer who had watched my video spoke up, his voice dropped an octave. He told wife to turn around and place her hands behind her back. Wife gasped. She started stammering, asking what was happening and insisting I was the one who attacked her. The sergeant barked out the reality check she desperately needed. He told her she was under arrest for filing a false police report and malicious misuse of the 911 system. He told her they had the entire fabricated incident on high-definition video. The silence that followed was absolute music to my ears. Through the front window, I watched them place heavy metal handcuffs on wife. The color had completely drained from her face. She looked like she was going to throw up on my hardwood floor. As they walked her out the front door and down the porch steps, she made direct eye contact with me. There was no anger left in her expression, and the smug entitlement was entirely gone. It was just pure, unadulterated panic. Down the street, I saw the bright red brake lights on BIL's van flare up. He had seen the police officers walking his sister out to the cruiser in handcuffs. The van abruptly pulled away from the curb, did a sloppy U-turn, and sped off into the night, completely abandoning her. I spent my entire Saturday morning at the police station, giving a formal, detailed statement and providing the detectives with the digital video files. But I didn't stop there. I also provided them with the printed chat logs from the iPad. That binder elevated her actions from a simple, heat-of-the-moment false report to a highly calculated, premeditated criminal conspiracy. First thing Monday morning, my lawyer formally filed for divorce. Simultaneously, I was granted a long-term restraining order against her. The family court judge reviewed the chat logs where her family discussed dismantling my life, combined with the police report and the video of her unhinged, violent behavior. The order was granted immediately. Wife was legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me, my home, or my workplace. She had to sit in a jail cell all weekend until she could beg MIL and FIL to drain their savings to post her bail on Monday afternoon. But my revenge wasn't complete. During my weekend deep dive into the massive amount of chat logs, I found a real reason for their incredibly urgent timeline. BIL hadn't just needed my money for simple investment margins. FIL ran a mid-sized commercial supply company, and he had given BIL the job of lead bookkeeper. In a separate, highly secretive chat thread I had recovered from the deep archives of the iCloud backup, BIL admitted to his parents that he had been heavily siphoning corporate money from the company to pay off massive debts to an illegal offshore sports betting syndicate. He was short almost $500,000, and the company's strict quarterly tax audit was scheduled for the following Tuesday. They desperately needed the equity from my house to quietly replace the stolen funds before the corporate auditors arrived and found a massive hole in the accounts. I didn't confront them. I didn't warn them. I just compiled every single text message regarding the missing company money, the illegal betting syndicate, and the detailed discussions about doctoring the financial books. I organized it neatly, just like I do for my clients. I mailed thick, anonymous packages to the state licensing board, the independent corporate auditors FIL used, and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The fallout over the next few months was absolutely catastrophic for their entire family. Wife's criminal case moved through the system quickly. Because she had 0 prior criminal offenses, she managed to avoid actual prison time, but she was formally convicted of a serious misdemeanor for the false report. She was slapped with 3 years of strict probation, hundreds of hours of community service, and mandatory psychiatric counseling that she has to pay for out of pocket. The divorce was finalized in record time. Because she had committed a documented crime against me with the explicit intent to defraud the marital estate, The family court judge was entirely unsympathetic to her tears. The laws protecting my premarital property were upheld without issue. She walked away with absolutely zero spousal support, zero equity in my house, and exactly half of the $3,000 that was left in our joint account. Her family fared so much worse. The IRS and external auditors descended on FIL's business like starving vultures within a week of getting my packages. The audit blew the doors off the place and revealed the full, sickening extent of BIL's embezzlement. The paper trail was undeniable. BIL was federally indicted for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and tax evasion. He couldn't plea his way out of it. He is currently serving 4 years in a federal correctional institution. Because of the scandal and the missing funds, FIL supply business completely collapsed. His business partner sued him into oblivion for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty for allowing his wildly unqualified son to run the books unchecked. FIL and MIL had to liquidate every penny of their retirement accounts and sell their large, beautiful home just to cover the mountain of legal fees and court-ordered restitution. They currently rent a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment 2 towns over. Wife has to live with them. She works a terrible retail job because her shiny new criminal record for fraud and false reporting makes it completely impossible for her to pass a basic background check in her previous corporate field. It's been exactly a year since that Tuesday night. My house is quiet, peaceful, and entirely mine. My assets are completely secure.